With the launch of Path of Fire yesterday came a general patch for the rest of the game too, and it was fairly substantive, so I wanted to talk about those changes with you guys. Today's video will be completely spoiler free. I'm not going to be talking about the expansion based stuff, but there will be footage of exploration of the early stuff in the Crystal Desert in the background. So hopefully you guys find that a good balance for those who are hungry for all the new stuff. And I'll have another video coming up very soon talking about my experiences of day one, so stay tuned for that. But a lot of cool stuff changed with Guild Wars 2 in general here, and I think it's really well worth going over. When Heart of Thorns came out, we also had a very big sort of general patch. They changed a huge amount of the UI, they added some new attributes to the game and so forth. I don't think it would be crazy to say that the Path of Fire one's a lot smaller than that, but maybe that's a sign that these days Guild Wars 2 is in a much more stable place, and it doesn't need such sweeping massive feature updates. Really all they have to do is deliver on established systems and continue providing content. So let's go through the patch notes. As always in a video like this is not going to be fully exhaustive. Trust me, that would be incredibly boring to hear about tiny bug fixes in specific little events. If you want the full details, there'll be a link in the description, but here is what's important in my view. So they open up the patch by saying, and I like it when they write stuff like this, yeah, we've just added the Crystal Desert region. Yeah, we've just added mounts. Yeah, we've just added elite spec. You know, they're listed out like they're minor patches in a list, when of course we know they're these huge things that had massive, enormous amounts of development effort behind them. So yeah, they say Crystal Desert, mounts, elite specs, and a new guild hall have all come to Guild Wars 2. And then, with that out of the way, we start looking at some other things. So first of all, the Mac client. We haven't had an AMA for a while, but this was often coming up in there. As you guys may or may not know, ArenaNet are currently working on a functioning, stable Mac client, so all those people who play it on Macs can get into Guild Wars 2. I did have a fairly angry-sounding tweet that supposedly anyone on a 32-bit Mac client can't play anymore. I'm really not sure about that. All the patch notes say is that they've improved keyboard handling, they fixed at least one crash, they have updated the way that full screen effects work, and now also you've got a repair functionality on Mac, which allows you to sort of scan through your .dat and make sure that everything's all in order. So they'll continue working on that, and I suppose that's a nice thing for Path of Fire. I probably haven't mentioned enough that people who play on Macs can now play Guild Wars 2, but there you have it. Moving on from the Mac client, let's start off with what is, in my opinion, one of the best changes that has come to Guild Wars 2 in a very long time, and it's a really subtle change. It's a change as well that I never would have anticipated being a good change. I never would have asked for it. It was completely unforeseen, and yet it has definitely improved my enjoyment, and it's so good. It's got me into that place where I'm feeling like, oh man, what if this had only been here for years ago? I always know that there's been a good change if I start lamenting the fact it wasn't there years ago, and it's to do with achievements and the way they ding. And this is very simple, but it's great. Essentially now, guys, while you're playing the game, while you're doing story, while you're out in the desert, while you're out in the jungle, while you're doing whatever, if you ding a collection or an achievement or something that would proc that area of the hero panel, it used to be that it would ding above your minimap, and if you clicked it, the notification would go away. But you never quite know, or often you wouldn't quite know what it was you had done. So let's say you're playing through the Flashpoint release, you're in Draconis Mons, and you've just picked up a fire shard or something, you get that little ding. But now if you want to know more about that achievement, that collection, you know you have to press H, you have to navigate to that area, you have to find the specific collection or story instance or map or whatever, then you have to find the one that you were actually just made a little bit of progress on, and sometimes that's easy to identify because you'll notice it's got a little progress on there. But if you've made tons of progress on tons of achievements, it can be annoying. Then you have to click into that and finally figure out whether it's something you're interested in. Now, when you left click that little notification, it will immediately throw open the hero panel and open that achievement so you can see those details. And again, this sounds like such a small thing, but it is really great for the flow of the gameplay. Because what happens now is as you're playing, say, the new story, if you successfully complete some kind of achievement, you'll get the ding and you'll be like, I wonder what that was. And you click it and you get to read that little flavor description they have written there in the UI. Oh, you managed to save X without Y happening. Or if you manage to pick something up in one of the new maps, you can quickly click, get the flavor text. Oh, there are all these pages of lore around. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 more. And here's how you can find all of them. Here's hints to where they are. It's great. It's made me so much. And this is someone who's already already a bit of an achievement hunter, it's made me so much more invested and aware of all of those parts of the game. And for any really established Guild Wars 2 player, you should know that you extract a lot more joy out of Guild Wars 2 if you're, instead of just zerging through the story, you're also going for achievements, you're also trying to finish the meta achievements, you're also trying to unlock those extra skins, especially with how much lore they've started loading into that stuff now. So it's really great how visible all of that has become. Just because you'll ding something, you can click, and within a second, you'll know. I find myself so much more invested. And so then the other thing that they did too, which is nice, is that old idea of clicking it to dismiss it. That's still possible. It's just instead of left clicking, you right click. And it's been great. You guys are going to see a lot of footage of me exploring the new expansion coming up. And you will see me constantly going back to this panel. I remember when I played Heart of Thorns and when I played Season 3 stuff, I knew that there were achievements to go for as I made that first journey through. But I never went for them much. I found in Path of Fire, just because of this UI change, I'm like trying to get all the achievements first time through in the instances and stuff because it's just that much more visible. So anyway, I've ranted and raved about that enough. I've really enjoyed it. I'd like to hear in the comments if you guys felt the same way. Here's another general change, quality of life change about stuff that floats above the minimap, and I think this is one that more veterans will probably enjoy. You guys know how when Guild Wars 2 released, they added this idea of a special, like, cool great chest that would appear on your UI. It would be a bouncy chest above the minimap, and you'd click that, and that would be some kind of big special reward. And that would be different to, say, getting loot from killing a mob, or different from opening a jumping puzzle chest, and so on. Slowly over time in Guild Wars 2, that special bonus chest has increasingly just been used as a standard method for giving rewards. It's not some big special thing you'll only see after Jormag is defeated or Tequato is defeated or something. It's something you see constantly, like in some maps after every single event. And what this means is, because they're using it in a very different style to what the UI was originally made for, is that you're constantly clicking, waiting for this slow-ass animation as the chest opens, then you hit accept in the middle of the screen, and then you open your next chest and you wait for the animation you hit. Has been annoying. So now they've added the ability to right-click those bouncy chests and bypass the animation altogether. So this is the way most of us will be opening those chests from now on. It's a reward structure like any other in that it's quickly give me my loot, but it's kind of nice because the noobs won't think to right-click immediately. They'll left-click and they'll still get that special flavor of, oh, I got something nice and amazing and fancy, even though realistically speaking, with the way it's used as a reward system these days, it's very rarely a special nice fancy thing. It's just kind of a standard reward. So there you go. That's right-clicking bouncy chests. I wonder if now that this has become this, one day we'll have a new version of the original idea of what those bouncy chests were supposed to be, which is a big glorious way of giving people loot that is a bit rarer. But yeah, so that's been great, and I find myself often forgetting it exists, but when I remember it exists, you can fly through the loot in addition to all the unidentified gear and stuff that's come with Path of Fire, which I forgot to mention in my big sum up yesterday. In addition to that, inventory management is so nice in the expansion. It really is, guys. So in addition as well, speaking of inventory management, a while back, you guys will know on certain items, the devs added the ability to right click a stack of items and consume all, like luck, right? So you can right click, consume all of your luck and get it done. Well, they've added that functionality to a lot of consumable containers too. So consumable containers, I have not really tested this, but I think they're talking about champ bags, bags of gear, stuff like that. They've added that on tons of them now, so you can right-click consume all there. Now, they were scared of doing this before because that can flood your inventory with items. And that can still happen. Players just have to be aware. There are fail-safes in place, so if you close the inventory in the middle, it will stop. If the inventory fills up, it will stop. So this also saves a huge amount of double-clicking. Some of the last areas of lots of double-clicking in Guild Wars 2, a game that once upon a time had tons of it. What I would like to see finally is one last thing for inventory management now, is at release in Vanilla Guild Wars 2, they added lots of interesting style bags, invisible bags and crafting bags and equipment bags and so on. I'd like to see they add a new variety of bags, not necessarily just bags with more storage capacity, but a new variety of bag that will never fill unless you drag something deliberately into it. And that functionality exists, I think, in small ways via some of those other bags, but it will never fill. And the reason I want that is so that I can right-click consume these bags. It will fill up my entire inventory when I dig through like bags of gear, but it will leave some slots always open. And what that means is that when I go to right-click salvage all later, I can do that comfortably, and those extra spare slots will be used to dump those initial sigils and luck qualities into, so that I don't start getting full inventory things and have to keep clicking deposit materials to sort of struggle my way through. This is a really weird thing I'm talking about right now, but people who play a lot of Guild Wars 2 will know what I'm saying. I'd love to have a bag like that. But, so there you go. Yes, more inventory management, cool stuff, and another nice patch. So, moving on, talking about items a little bit, they did update some legendaries. They updated Bolt, they updated Incinerator, and they updated the Flames of War. And they updated these three with respect to their projectiles. So if you guys don't know, when you get a legendary weapon, it changes projectile animations on certain things. So if I have the Incinerator on my Elementalist and I auto-attack, maybe I'll put some footage in the background for you guys to see here, and I auto-attack on Fire 1, it changes the animation of what it would be by default. Now, that became a bit of a problem recently when they did it with bolts, and it just kind of looked hilarious and broke a lot of animations, like the Guardian Sword 3 ended up looking a bit rubbish. Some of the Renegade stuff started looking a bit rubbish. People didn't enjoy some of it, and there's been a whole thing to do with it. I think that these updates are aimed at improving that. There's been very little, for the amount of discussion that there was on the problem, there's been very little discussion on the solution. In fact, I've not seen any online right now, but maybe that's just because it came alongside with an expansion, and those who suffered from that, hey, might be happy. Some other stuff as well. Then we get into specific changes all around the world. There were lots of bug fixes and patches and random events being updated. Like Triple Trouble Worm had an update based on picking up kegs. There was an event in Gendaran Fields that had an update. There was an event in Ember Bay that had an update and other stuff. Legendary Crafting had a change. Episode 6 that just came out, the second mission, had a patch for better co-op gameplay. I'm not going to go into too many details here, but as always, I feel that I should point out, this stuff's great. I really like these global patches. I always spend so little time talking about them, but they're always so awesome, and I love to see that this quality of life keeps going up and up and up for the entire game, and just, you know, they keep ironing kinks out, even in random places like, yeah, Gendaran, and Living World Season 3 continues getting quality of life updates. That's all great to me. So listed elsewhere in the patch notes, they talk a bit about personal story. They say this, added the ability for instance boundaries in personal story missions to be updated dynamically as each chapter's narrative moments unfold. So I've talked to you guys about this already. This is a nice thing that they're doing in Path of Fire story, and it's been great. It allows them to have much more interesting maps for where the story takes place, but without the players wandering all over the shop, and that's especially important with mounts and movement speeds increased a lot. But the way they've written this in the patch notes, it occurred to me, does this mean they've gone back and done that for core personal story too? Is that what these notes are suggesting? I mean, probably not, because in patch notes often they use that personal story subheading as quite a broad descriptor of lots of different changes, but that's a nice idea, isn't it, that they would go back and change a lot of personal story stuff? I think then maybe some more visibility on what are the boundaries of instances beyond just the mini-map would be kind of nice. That would be a good change for personal story. Nowhere near what it really needs, but a nice change. I don't know, maybe they haven't done that. So then we have some more specific areas of the game I want to move into, like World vs. World, PvP, and so forth. Let's start with Fractals. So as you guys know, when Episode 6 came out, a new Fractal came out as well with a challenge mode. It is currently the 100. It's the end of a trilogy of Fractals that they added throughout the Living World Season 3 days. I haven't actually talked to you guys about that just yet. Don't worry, that will be coming. So maybe some of the context of this will be lost for some of you. But it's a very complicated Fractal, and especially the challenge mode has a lot of different mechanics and things going on. So there have been a ton of changes, basically. Just a lot of general fixes and improvements to 100 challenge mode. And not just challenge mode, but earlier scales as well. So, like, there was an ability that was doing, what did they say, 10 times the amount of damage it was supposed to at tier 3. So they've changed that. So one of the big problems, really, and I do think this is the biggest problem with that most recent Fractal, was its scaling functionality. Like, the 25 doesn't feel different enough to the 50, to the 75, to the 100, and that means weak-ish teams were struggling in there, and that shouldn't happen. People should not feel scared to go into Fractals, and generally speaking, they don't, but people think of it as this big, scary endgame place. Early-level Fractals are easy as hell, and should be easy as hell, so that people are encouraged to get their foot in the door and maybe actually start, learning how to play better gradually. And so, yeah, that was one of the bigger things. They've been changing that. Lots of the patches have been affecting 100 CM. The biggest change for me is they actually had a thing for the challenge mode where you will always have a platform available to stand on next to the boss, because this is a fight where the floor starts getting deleted. Now, when I was in progression on this fight and I was slow and we didn't have a very good comp, this fight gets really hard. If you have low damage, if you have like an oddball comp, this fight to sustaining in the last moments of that encounter are really challenging. And so this change will make that scenario much more tolerable, and so that's nice. What I now find these days is challenge mode, if you have a good comp, is ridiculously easy. No more in any area of Guild Wars 2's Fractals have I seen how easy something gets if you can just kill quickly. This is an amazing fight if you can kill quickly, because you can ignore so many mechanics and so much necessity to actually be good at the game just because you're wiping the boss out fast. I actually think it's kind of broken in how insane it is. There is a massive difference, but maybe we'll talk about that in another video. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is most experienced groups won't really care about this change I just described, but those who are just starting out will. Yeah, then Chaos and Nightmare had a lot of changes. Those were also a part of that trilogy of which I mentioned. Singularities have moved. There's a portal for slow players to catch up in Chaos. Funnily enough, they nerfed the shark in the Nightmare Fractal, who's an optional boss you don't have to fight. And I killed that shark for fun for the first time in months, just 2 days ago, and now he's been nerfed. So I'm glad I got that last experience of that horrible deadly shark in right before the end. And then other fractals outside of the trilogy had changed. Uncategorized is a big, long, complicated fractal. They tuned it so that you can, they moved some checkpoints so it's a bit more comfortable to move around. Specifically, I think the biggest change is the Volcanic Fractal. The boss at the end of Volcanic Fractal had one of its most important attacks with these lava fonts bugged, and it wasn't doing anything for so long. That's now been re-implemented, and that actually works. So that's great. I wonder if they're ever going to do that, by the way, for the Ratanovus lane for the Chuck Gerrant, which has had hit ceiling attack bugged in the same way for like well over a year now. Come on, people. All right, so there you go, that's Fractals. Moving on, we got World versus World and PvP. PvP didn't have much, but I do think it had an important change. Automated tournaments. They've now doubled the amount of positions you can be in and still be rewarded. So it used to be 1st to 8th place, I guess, only got rewarded. I've actually still never played an automated tournament, so I could be wrong about this. But it was only the 1st to 8th teams that won anything. Now the 9th to 16th will. Does that mean everyone who enters a daily automated tournament will be compensated for their time now? Is that what that means? I think it might. And that could be good for the daily automated tournament scene. As for the World vs. World side stuff, pretty exciting update. New desert creatures have wandered into the desert borderlands. Woo! So it's obvious what they've done here. They've just added a desert expansion with all these new awesome varieties of creatures, and so they've filtered those in to its appropriate borderland. What that does mean now is that a core Guild Wars 2 player without the Path of Fire expansion can experience fighting sand sharks and stuff. Presumably there are sand sharks there. I don't know exactly what varieties they are. I haven't been there, but so that's a nice change, and I think a fitting and fun thing. Actually, I wouldn't have considered doing that, but it makes sense. They also, by the way, did a lot of itemization updates for World vs. World. So there is a new reward track, the Crystal Desert reward track. Now, in the patch notes, this is listed as a World vs. World change and not a PvP change. It actually is a PvP change as well. You can do the Crystal Desert reward track in PvP as well. So there's one new reward track. That's crazy, isn't it? An expansion just came out. A content-rich expansion just came out. And we got a single reward track for the PvP formats? I mean, didn't Hearthorns have like 4? One for each map? But we only get one this time. I wonder what you guys think of that. But for World vs. World specifically, if you own POF, then all the Ascended gear, you can now select POF stat stuff. They changed Proof of Heroics into a new thing, and there's some other item changes. You can now automatically unlock Path of Fire hero challenges from World vs. World, so you never have to explore the desert to get your elite specialization fully unlocked, and things like that on the item side that we already knew were coming because the devs had mentioned it, but are now listed out here. There's also automatic armor repair now when you go back to your home Borderlands. I think it actually says home instance. I'm pretty sure it doesn't mean home instance as in personal story, you know, Ratasum, Black Citadel home instance, because it's listed on the World vs. World thing. So automatic armor repair, I guess this is because commanders found it annoying, presumably, to have to walk over to an anvil to repair everyone's armor every now and then and go back out. So, I mean, the levels of which they have reduced the importance of this mechanic and automated it and streamlined, it's not a mechanic anymore. Just delete it at this point.
Please, sorry.
So the next big thing to talk about is balance. So this was a balance patch as well. I did anticipate a balance patch when POF came out. There were certain things that never arrived when we had the big balance a couple of weeks ago. And it seemed like they were going to do a balance patch here. Now, as you guys know, I actually got to play sort of a developer version of the Elite Specs a long time ago that was a different build to the demos the broader public got to experience. Like in those demos, I got to look at all the Elite Spec collections, and certain things were enabled that weren't in the demos. And so I was expecting some changes for this patch, but this patch never ended up anywhere near the scope that I thought it was going to be, though there have been some nice changes. So let's go through them, and I'll talk about specifically a big story to do with Necro in a second. So first, pulls and knockbacks have globally been changed a bit. They explain that this is to reduce the chance of people being stuck in terrain. So I guess the speed that you can pull people out or knock people back might have changed. I don't know exactly what will happen there. Maybe it's only on specific skills. And then, of course, there's class-specific stuff. Again, I'm only picking at the things that really struck me. So for Elementalist, Churning Earth got a ton more bleed put onto it as you're charging it up. The reason for that, I think, mostly is because they anticipate a lot of Weavers that like Condi stuff running a dagger in their offhand, and they want more worthwhile conditioned damage on that offhand when they're in Earth, which is, you know, supposed to be the domain of some conditioned damage, and they didn't really have much before. So you now get some bleed even if your final proc doesn't hit and the overall amount is higher. So I think that's more Weaver oriented, not that we'll necessarily be using Churning Earths in rotations and stuff as far as PvE is concerned. Obviously, I'll leave that up to other people who want to grind on the Golem instead of me. So most interestingly for Ellie is what we didn't get. Now, I was sure in that dev build I saw Barrier on Earth. I'm even fairly sure I had a conversation with someone about it, and it's not here. So maybe they scrapped that idea, maybe they didn't like it. I'm really not sure. It's weird how memory is starting to fail me. It wasn't that long ago, and now I'm not certain of anything anymore. But no Barrier in Earth, and I think that's pretty sad. Maybe I was confused about a Weaver trait. Who knows? For Engineer, an interesting change was Elixir B got its might moved from 1 to 5. And I love this change because this is a very clear-cut, obvious demonstration of a vanilla power level skill. You know, that's a balanced skill at vanilla. Moving up to Path of Fire power creep levels of Guild Wars 2 stuff. It's a beautiful demonstration. Just move the mic from 1 to 5 and there you go. Now it feels about in line. For Guardian, which I've been playing a lot of lately, there was a bit of a nerf to retaliation on one of their heal skills, but I think that was mostly to do with people bypassing an internal cooldown, or maybe that might have even been a tooltip change. But anyway, Spirit Weapons. Spirit Weapons can now be cast faster. They had a big functionality change in the recent balance patch, but they felt a bit too clunky to use, so those faster casts are quite nice. Over on Mesmer, one of their core abilities, Mirror Images, has now baseline got the functionality where it will break enemy targeting. Again, I don't know how much this will affect PvE stuff, but for World vs. World and PvP, that's really interesting. That's mostly a Mirage-y thing, but it's actually available on core Mesmer there on Mirror Images now, so it's not just great clone generation, but it's got that too. I really want to play with that and see where it's most useful, because it's not like someone's in the middle of a kill shot and you can mirror images and then the kill shot will miss. They will detarget you, but their kill shot should still be tracked. Unless they have that option enabled where it changes target mid thing. I don't know. This will be really curious. I want to play with that. So that's the Mesmer change that really struck me. Revenant had some nice power buffs, and we all know Revs want more power buffs, so that was the Sword 2 and 3. I remember when Heart of Thorns came out, that 3 felt really meaty and awesome, and then they kind of nerfed it, and it's felt limp and sucky ever since. But the 3 got another 10% buff, so I think it's probably still not where I would want it, but slowly but surely. And then lastly, the thing I would pick at, Ranger got a ton of bug fixes more than anything else. I don't know whether there was anything really substantial that came from that. But then Conditioned Daredevil, and this is the first real big elite spec oriented thing that I'm talking about today, had some tunes to bring it back in line because it was pretty blown out before, and so I might say that that's a good change, but obviously we have 9 new elite specializations, and what we consider a good build, a good benchmark, a good rotation, a good whatever might be completely different across the landscape now. But yeah, that if the new elite specializations hadn't just been added, I would say that that is something that most of us would have been calling for. Okay, and then finally let's talk about Necro. So I just explained, I went out on this trip. I had a lot of conversations with devs, I had definitely been left under the impression that there would be a change to Condition Reaper. Because as we all know, Reaper really at its base is supposed to be a powery thing. And if Scourge is getting added, which is supposed to be a Condi thing, why do we have 2 elite specializations competing over the same space? I had a very definite conversation about this, and I'd been left with the impression that there would be a change. In fact, in the footage I presented of my trip there was a moment where I turned Reaper on and specifically moused over Bitter Chill, because at that time in real life, a dev had prompted me to do so because we were in the middle of a conversation about a Bitter Chill nerf. So what I moused over was actually the PvP version, which made it look like it had already been nerfed. And then when the post-show came out, I said, hey, yeah, I think that this is going to be happening, and then Power will sort of fill that role, and then we'll get Scourge as the proper Condi thing. And of course, this was quite exciting to people. This was a sign of pretty good design, and we were just all kind of waiting for it. So, a couple of things happened. First, we had the patch a few weeks ago. The patch a few weeks ago didn't do anything to Condi application of Reaper, which perhaps is fine because, you know, why just eliminate Reaper while waiting for Scourge to come out? It did do some minor buffs to Power as promised. It did do the changes to Spite as I had been shown on the day, though the Spite changes weren't really anywhere near as substantive as I hoped. And so then the idea was maybe this patch was where the Bitter Chill nerf would be dropped. There'd be even more power buffs to compensate it with that freed up budget, and we'd be in that place. This patch didn't really do that. Now, this patch did do more for Power Reaper, but definitely not enough to push it into like a best in slot power build position. And Bitter Chill didn't have any change at all. So if you look back at me on the post show, I basically led everyone astray at this point and kind of stirred a pot of necromancer, power necromancer love that in the end really hasn't manifested in anything as it seems. So the power buffs, to look at them more specifically, are okay. You get 10% solid more damage versus chilled foes now, and a 10% modifier like that are generally very strong. We just need more of them, really. And Reaper's Onslaught now gives you 30% more ferocity than it used to. It's gone from like 225 to 300. I think it's just less than 30% more. I'm not too good at maths. And they also baseline changed the way it works. So Reaper's Onslaught was a trait that meant if someone died near you while you were in Shroud, it reduced the cooldown of all of your Shroud stuff. I've talked about why this is sort of rubbish many times before. If you kill someone in the middle of the 4 while it's channeling, it doesn't reduce the cooldown of the 4 already. So they changed it to just, it chunks your cooldowns down as you unload auto attacks. So it's the same kind of idea. As your Onslaught continues, you ramp and ramp and ramp, and you can get access to more cooldowns to do more damage to continue onslaughting. But it doesn't revolve around enemy death anymore. So what this is essentially a nerf to those really extreme open world scenarios where you could just permanently camp Shroud, regaining life force from the death of tons of things in massively scaled meta events, and chunking your cooldowns down. So that has gone, and I think it has lost some pretty interesting flavor. But it's evened out now more. It's much more viable in other places where death and experience gain doesn't come in so much. So I think a lot of people will think of raids there, obviously, because you don't tend to get lots of death going on in raids. But there are several places where that's worthwhile. So they are power buffs. The power buffs did come. The Condi thing didn't quite. I think it is more substantive than a lot of people would suggest. For some people, it's a binary on-off thing. Either this build is amazing or it's absolutely dog tier, and I don't agree with that at all. I think that incremental little buffs can continue rolling in, and they have closed the gap between Power Reaper being very far behind others. There are other things to consider too, like quality of life as you play builds and so on, which most casual balance enthusiasts, which this community has a ton of, never have any actual respect or appreciation for. But so there you go. That is what happened with Reaper. I am disappointed we never got the Bitter Chill thing. Hopefully Scourge just does so much ludicrous Condi that it doesn't matter, and I guess that trait we'll just won't look at too much anymore, unless we want to do it just for a bit of funsies in the areas of the game that it calls for. My fear mostly when it comes to this Reaper stuff, and a lot of the other Heart of Thorns Elite specs now, is that because they're Heart of Thorns specs, are they maybe going to get negligent balance? But that remains to be seen. We've seen these specs be changed as Path of Fire comes out. Who knows? Maybe in 2 months we'll get even more changes to Heart of Thorn stuff and Path of Fire stuff. Though I would probably expect it's the POF specs that are going to get the majority focus for a good little while now. All right, so there you go. That's balance. Last but not least, there is Black Lion stuff. So they added 3 more shared inventory slots to the game. There are so many now. They added a new outfit, which makes you look like that cage-headed creature from one of the trailers. It's called the Forged outfit. There are 6 new hair colors that they added. There are 2 new hairstyles for humans, suited for the desert. You remember they did a patch where they added a bunch of these for free? Well, there's some exclusive ones now as well. And they added several new bald options. I think people want stuff for other races, but they're mostly focusing on humans here. And Black Lion chests got a ton of updates. There's new guaranteed wardrobe unlocks, like they added loads more of those. There are Hydra staff that's available. There's a new backpack that's available. You get raptors in the chests now when you collect them. I'm not sure how this works, but I think you tier them up like llamas. There's all sorts going on for Black Lion, and obviously they want people to have worthwhile ways to spend the gems that they just acquired from getting Ultimate Edition or POF or whatever. And so there you go, guys. Those are the global changes for the game. That's a bit of balance. I did want to talk about that with you all. One other thing, actually, that I thought was interesting about this patch were things I expected to come but didn't. You guys remember those early demo builds I showed off with the interesting, like, fighting game style health bar chunking? That never became a thing in the end. As far as I'm aware, it's not a thing. Neither did we get some other, like, more broad UI changes that Heart of Thorns gave. And I wonder whether you guys are okay with that. You think that that sort of fresh new expansion paint coating has been properly delivered. Any of the topics, any of the changes, if you want to have a bit of a discussion on that in the comments. I know that we just at the end of the video talked about balance, so probably a lot of the comments will be about that. But if you've got interesting thoughts on some of those other things, please do let me know. And I will see you very, very shortly for some cool information and reports on how the expansion itself has gone, which I know many of you will be very keen to listen to. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next time.